I'm here with an old friend, David Corke, who's executive director of the London Training Centre, dealing a lot around food and culinary training and other things. But Dave, you got started in this food thing 36 years ago, same time as I did. So we've been around a while and we watched a lot of things change and move along. And I'm also very much aware that you folks moved in the food bank, or like a couple of blocks apart, right? So, we're neighbors, we know one another, and it's great. But why don't we start off? I'd like to get into the food security situation in London, but why don't we start off about the London Training Centre? It's been around for a while, so can you tell us what it does and what the operation is?
Certainly can. So the foundation of the organization in '87 was helping young people who were vulnerable in the community and giving them some very fundamental and basic food skills so they could get jobs in food retail, helping them move forward and find a sense of more security in their own lives. A very simple model, not a complex or long program. So that was many years ago. From that time, there's been different iterations of programs, but always essentially the core of helping people develop some skills, some related to food, some just about self-confidence and ability,
Yeah.
and then helping them move into employment. Our specialty, as you said, has been over the years working with food service employers and hospitality employers. But more recently, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've been doing some work with food production and also now food manufacturing. So we're helping people connect with the food sector and the food industry for themselves in terms of their careers, but also in terms of their confidence and ability to lift themselves up and move forward.
So what I find fascinating in all of that is that you also are training employers, which I didn't really know till about a week ago, actually, in talking with you. But that is so essential now, because obviously the whole labor thing, the employment thing around not just food, but Canada in general, has really changed. Why are those employers coming to you?
Well, I think we may all be aware of the situation with the economy and the way it is. But what's happened in the labor market is that it's through COVID and even before COVID, it started to turn on its head. There weren't enough people to fill the jobs that were being made available. It's wonderful that Southwestern Ontario and the London region is a growing economic place for food manufacturing and food businesses and food innovators, and it's the abundance of water and the wonderful soils and the production possibilities that we have here that make that possible. But then these employers need people with skills, and we need the labor force, and it's just not corresponding. We don't have enough people to fill the opportunities, and that's a real challenge. And so helping employers, part of our work is helping employers understand that there are people looking for work. There are people with barriers, perhaps, that may not have been the ideal candidates for those opportunities some years ago. But now the employers have to start working with people and understand the human elements of what they're dealing with, because truly, some people will tell you that those people become sometimes the very best employees.
Yeah. Dave, would I be right in saying that one of your key funders is the provincial government?
Yes, that's correct. For through Employment Ontario, so the Ministry of Immigration, Labor and Skills Development fund our employment services. So we provide a full menu of employment services that are essentially designed and represent what the ministry would like to see people in terms of how they are helped. So we've been doing that work since about 2009, and it continues today. There's a bit of an evolution going on in the employment sector. Just recently, the new model that the ministry is moving towards is a regional systems manager who will be managing this region. And the target people, again, just representing what I had said earlier, they want us to work with more people with more barriers. That, typically those people were not ignored, certainly not encouraged or connected to the employment opportunities the employers had. But really, the ministry is trying to make those connections and support those people so they can move into the workforce.
Yeah. It's interesting around the regional piece, what you're saying is because I think you and I cooperated for a few years with Western Fare as they were looking at trying to establish some way of bringing food from outside of London into London. So rather than going up the 401 to the food terminal and out to all of these other places, many of the growers in the area, and we had talked to a lot of them at that time, we'd had a former provincial minister help us with putting together that white paper about that. But what he discovered, John Snoblin, what he had discovered was that lots of the growers and producers in this area would really like to get their stuff to London. Oftentimes they would take it up to the terminal. What wasn't sold ended up, they just left it there, and then that went off to charities and others. But that's not the kind of system you're looking for. They wanted to bring it in locally. So it's interesting when you're talking about employment that we're talking about a regional manager. But really, I think when it comes to food, it's tough to see a lot of regional management in that. Would you agree?
Uh, well, there's so many components here that could make a new system work. It's just it's hard to see. Sometimes it's hard for us to see who would take the lead on that, and government doesn't always take the lead.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a collective of ideas. I love working with and learning more about food production. Certainly, the agriculture sector has its own labor market challenges and workforce challenges. But there's so many pieces here. It's like when you get a Meccano set, and I know I'm dating myself by saying that, but you have so many pieces, and you know that the possibility of building something that works better or works economically or effectively for a region that has all the parts. You just want to get the right partners around the table and maybe design something that could and can work. And I really still, generally, I'm an optimist, and I believe that that's possible. The things that we were talking about with the folks at the Western Fair, even 10 years ago, all of the component parts are still there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what Western Fare has really moved into has been really interesting. You and I were talking about that just before this, that, they're doing a lot with the Grove and with food production and other things. And that is really going to be an essential piece to whatever the future is going to be. The piece that we were talking about 10 years ago was another component, which is where the farmers and the growers and the producers, organic farmers, all of those, could get their food into London, have it sold to Londoners and institutions in London, restaurants and others, driving down the cost of food, but also providing fresh local alternatives. It seems to me that that part has kind of fallen off the rails, and that we need more help there. I do remember once when I was in Ottawa, I was meeting with the Deputy Minister for Finance in Queen's Park here in Toronto, and he said, "Glenn, you know what the major strength of London is, don't you?" Mm-hmm. And so I didn't. And that shows you how ignorant I was, but I didn't. I wasn't sure, so I said, "Well, health sector." Right, that one would make sense, or post-secondary sector. And he just kind of looked at me and he said, "It's food. It's food. Your whole region from London down to Windsor is food." And yet for some reason you folks have trouble bringing all of that together. That's really true. You had an idea back then, and we talked about this before as well. Why don't we have a terminal regionally that regional farmers can bring it to? Can you expand on that just a bit?
Yeah, so it was through some research that we were doing that took us out of the urban settings and our work with people in the city proper to started talking to some of the close regional folks, Middlesex, Oxford County, Essex County, Lambton. And ideally, specifically, we wanted to speak to small and medium producers, many of them ecological in terms of their production, niche markets that were serving opportunities, special vegetables and things that they could, because they were interested in producing these products, right? And they said, really part of the problem is that there's no system to move what we grow and that the land grows well into the cities. As you say, it went up the highway to the terminal in Cambridge. And so as simple as sometimes farmers are just, they say the most straightforward things in the most wonderful way. And that is, if only the terminal was closer, if it was here, if we had our own terminal. And as simple as that, really, that's part of the solution for these small and medium-sized growers. And think of the environmental impact of not shipping vegetables all that distance and the cost.
Yeah, I went with Hugh Mitchell, who was the former president of Western Fair, and we went up to St. Jacobs where they had this auction. And it was just one empty warehouse of about 15 truck bays on both sides. It was long and it was narrow. It had three things: a men's washroom, a woman's washroom, and a coffee machine. That was all it had in it. And in the one side, at this particular time in the morning, all the Mennonite wagons came in, pulled by horses, people all dressed up in their customary and cultural norms. But they brought great food in, and they would bring it in, and it would be labeled and put as part of a lot. And then an auctioneer would come with the thing around his head, and he would start asking for bidders for the stuff. But in the other side, in came all of these pickup trucks and semi trucks that were from hospitals, restaurants, big chains, food chains, all that kind of stuff. And they bought that food. And so within an hour after it was bought, everything was moved into those trucks. The trucks were gone, the farmers were all gone, and the warehouse was empty. So that was a 2 hour period of time where a lot of food was moved through, good quality food at a good price, with groups that really wanted to buy that kind of food. I think we used to talk about that a bit as well. Like, why can't we set up something like that more in London so Londoners, growers in the area could bring their stuff into here? It seems to make sense to me.
It does. I think the way you described is more of a localized, produced and consumed model.
Yeah.
So you think about hospitals north of the city, maybe Huron County or Lambton County. It costs a lot of money to bring a company's vegetables in that may have come from the terminal all the way up
Yeah.
to those areas, and the wonderful efficiencies that come from that Mennonite community in that region that really make the terminal work. The essence of it is it's produced there and consumed there. And those food purchasers from those facilities, the hospitals and the schools and so on and so forth, became very aware it was cost effective. It was wonderful, seasonal, healthy food. And it just made sense on every level. And when you look at London and how it's surrounded by so much arable land and producing that can produce that food, why couldn't we do that? It's just a question of scale.
Yeah.
And it can, I think it really can move beyond a demonstration project. Sorry, that terminal was not a demonstration project. It worked for the local community
Yeah.
in that local region for the growers and the consumers.
And at the very least, we could do that in London. Like, there's lots of us that are interested in that. I remember in that time, the city was part of our deliberations that you and I were part of, along with the provincial former minister and others. I mean, there was really a lot of stuff going on. So there were people with resources, organizations with knowledge and research and other things. But they don't quite get off the ground. And you're quite right. It is a local solution, but it's the kind of solution that would begin to expand as more regional farmers and others in the area. It's an opportunity that's closer than the terminal. They would have come. We just couldn't quite get it there, which is unfortunate because those needs are still great. Can I ask you about food again, just for a second? How in your it's been over 3 decades for you and me both, but how do you see the food, the whole food thing, the industry, the consumption, food banks, poverty? Have you seen a lot of change in that recently, or do you just think it's kind of gradually moving in that area, or do you see some things that have really come and disrupted the system and made it dysfunctional?
Uh, Disruption's not always a bad
No,
word,
it's not. No.
and I,
You do it. You do it, and it's awesome what that you do.
but thank you. I've seen different. Some things were more subtle and over time, and I like. Prior to my work here in this sector, and I was in food retail in the restaurant business.
Mm.
I'm always interested in what drives the success in terms of growth and opportunity for not just people, but economically in regions. And what I saw was, and what I felt was, you have to follow the consumer, or what are the consumer's choices, or what are the consumer's challenges.
Mm.
So over the last 30 years, we've seen much to London and region's benefit, waves of immigration, and they bring their food cultures from other countries and other communities. And that has started to subtly change things. So what happens? Then small retailers representing the food from, say, North Africa, or, one of the Asian countries, that are supporting those small communities. But that's a bit of an economic disruptor. And all of a sudden you see the large chains. Oh, there's a food aisle now. You go down and there used to be breakfast cereals. But now there are these rices and grains and
Mhm.
pulses that you never saw. So I like to see and watch the subtle changes. So that's been going on in London for, I think, 2, 3 decades now. More recently, in terms of disruption, and certainly a more difficult disruption, has been the economic realities. And everybody, it doesn't matter who you talk to. It can be a bank president, or it can be someone that you meet in the line at the food bank across the street from our offices here. Everyone talks about the price of food now because everyone's affected by it. And some can afford to manage it more than others, but everyone talks about it. And what it's starting to do now, and what we see in the people that come through our doors saying, I have this much money in my budget, or I need a job, but I have to learn how to use this food product and use all of it and use it effectively. So, all of these little pieces, these nuanced pieces that the consumers, and I don't mean retail consuming, I mean sometimes eating,
Yeah.
eating food, which we need every day. All of those little disruptions, and then the severe disruptions of the economic piece that's going on now, all of those things are starting to change broadly, and I think it gives people power. I really think that there's the opportunity for a wave and an understanding, and that means systems change. So, whatever created that aisle where there's grains and pulses from different countries on the other side of the planet 10 years ago, in the next few years, because of the economic realities, I think there's an opportunity for a new system and a new way for people in this close community.
So that's interesting. You put the nice side of disruptive face up there for us to see, and it's true. Can I put up the bad side? At least
Sure.
one of them. And that is, you work hard at developing things as groups like the Training Center, others do, universities, food research groups, and others. You work away on these things, and then all of us, and there's government support for those kind of things, not just finance, but interest, policy interest. And then all of a sudden, you go through a change of government,
Mm.
right? Democracy brings in a whole new wave, a whole different kind of mindset. And the government that comes in afterwards, and we have three different levels of government, and we felt this at all three levels, right? They suddenly turned a blind eye towards all that has been developing over the previous years and start putting in their own kind of stuff. And I think when I talk about some of the troublesome, disruptive changes that I have seen, that's been part of it. A lot of these things have been local, community things, or network situations like food banks do, or training centers, or others do. But then all of a sudden, there'll be an election. Suddenly, everything changes, funding drops, interest recedes, and then we never quite get back to what it was that we were trying to cumulatively build over that time. Have you seen that? Does that has that affected your sector very much? Because I know
It
you
has,
government
and
funding.
not just our employment sector or the training sector, but every sector, the charitable sector, the pick one, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
What I learned, and I sometimes even after 30 years feel naive about my position here and what I know and what I don't know, but I have a sense that we've all become surfers in a way. The successive waves of government change and policy
Yeah.
change, or this is the new way, or it's the same challenge, but a different way that they want to address it. And we, at the other end of the service end, of the human end of those policy changes, we just learn to ride the wave and
Yeah.
continue to do the work we do. Sadly and regrettably, sometimes policy changes can be so drastic that it actually ends the work of organizations that do amazing things. Um, and I don't think necessarily that our model here at London Training Center is the only one that works, but let me share for a moment. So I had come from the private sector many years ago, and I like business. I like the excitement of the retail exchange and the
Mhm.
innovation and the development of new ideas and products and services. I was a service professional. And I always thought when I came to this sector, one of the most difficult pieces I had to learn was going to an information session. Wonderful funders would come, and say, this is our policy direction. We're willing to fund this, and we want it, programs that represent these ideas. And so everyone would sort of conform a bit, and we'd all compete against each other.
Yeah.
Very difficult. So what I decided for the organization, and some of the pieces were already here existing as trainers, was to develop an enterprise model. So really, in the last 10 years, 15 years, our organization has developed a revenue generation model with services. So we're a Red Cross trainer, for example, or some of our food services and some of the things that we do, they generate revenue for our organization. And consequently, I don't have to go to those meetings where I'm competing with, community partners for the same funding dollar. They need those dollars. Their programs need those dollars. But for our organization, we found a way to fund our own programs or some of our own programs by generating revenue through services.
Yeah.
So we still surf, we
Yes.
still surf the waves, but we also have revenues and ways and opportunities and resources to react and act on things that we think are worth doing.
Yeah, I also think that the private sector has much more to offer in this regard. We've really discovered that as a food bank. You think of Business Cares, that 700 businesses that work with us
Yeah.
on an ongoing basis. I know lots of us have business partners, but they are in it not necessarily for the interest of product or profit. They're in it for the area of community and trying to develop new ideas, but they bring an entrepreneurial attitude to it, which I think is very interesting. Often groups will come together, they'll come up with an idea, and their way of going forwards is, well, here's a government program we could apply for funding for, or another funding group. And the problem with a lot of those things is that they tend to be 2 or 3 years of funding, and then you run out, right? The private sector, it seems to me, we've really experienced this a lot at the food bank. They come in and say, you have to develop more of a sustainable way of reaching out and going there. And they've come up with many ideas. I know you work a lot with that, but you would sense that too, right? I'm sure that's the kind of counsel you've been given.
Yes, very much. Another part of that equation is knowing when to stop doing something.
Hmm.
So yes, tragically, wonderful support from corporations and businesses in London for many organizations, and that's helpful, or even government or funders. But as you say, it comes to an end, and then who's impacted most negatively? The organizations that provide those services,
Yeah.
yes, perhaps, but it's the
Clients.
consumers, it's the
Yeah,
people
that's
that
right.
develop the connection to that help.
Yeah.
Something else that I learned that I'm mindful of, and sometimes it's difficult for our sector to undertake, and that is to look at things critically. An old friend shared with me once. He was working with an executive from the Kellogg's Corporation, and that gentleman had said to him, the wonderful thing about your nonprofit sector is you develop wonderful things, programs and services for people, and you just plow ahead and just always focused on the good, the good, the good, and delivery of those services. But sometimes you don't stop to see that they're not working well enough. He
Mm.
said, in our business, we develop a breakfast cereal, and if it doesn't sell, it's gone, and we stop
Yeah.
doing it. So sometimes some of the hard decisions in our sector, I think, are work with partnership, figure out what works really well. But if it's not working, put your resources and your ideas and your thoughts in a different direction. Try
Yeah.
something new.
Yeah.
Be strong enough and have the courage to stop and then restart.
Yeah. No, that's right. Dave, what's in store for you? What's in store for the London Training Center? You're out there in Adelaide Street South, close to the food bank. You're going through these different models. I'm sure COVID has affected certain things. What do you see as the next few years looking like for you as an organization?
Well, that's really hard. I don't think anybody's standing on firm ground right now, so
Yeah.
it's hard to predictively say. Our organization probably is best known for consistently growing in an incremental way. So, as dull as it sounds, the training center will continue to train. Um, we're very pleased to maintain our brand and role as a food and culinary trainer. So, in as much as we're teaching people how to handle food safely in partnership with the Middlesex London Health Unit, and that's fundamental, not only for jobs, but to keep your family safe at home, to know how to handle food safely. So we'll continue to do that work. We also continue to do culinary training and get wonderful support from the ministry for that work as well. And we do a culinary pre-apprenticeship. It's very exciting for people to the advent of the Food Network and all of those things. Um, not everyone becomes, Gauguin in terms of their work with food. Food artistry is a challenging thing, but you can do it at home in your own house for your family. So we love doing that work. So that will always be consistently there. We will consistently do the work in partnership with the government about helping people find work and working with employers over the next few years. There's going to be, as I said, a lot more work with companies and employers
Yeah.
so that they adapt to the workers that are available. So there'll be that over the next few years. And also our role as a Canadian Red Cross trainer. So we're doing a lot of work in Canadian Red Cross training. We're an instructor development center, so we're teaching people to become Red Cross trainers. And wonderfully, something brand new, and we see some growth in this area and perhaps some need, is the Red Cross has developed psychological first aid, and it's only newly been launched. It's a wonderful, accessible program, but it's about wellness and personal wellness and resilience. You have to learn how to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. It's not an emergency response like a first aid program,
Yeah.
but really more about personal strength and understanding before you can help others. And I think at a time of disruption and so much difficulty, I want to believe that our organization can bring that to the community and to people. I think that that's something worth doing, and that's certainly a direction we're going in.
That's fascinating, Dave. I didn't know that, but you can see the integration, like the integration, for instance, between mental health and food, right?
Mm-hmm.
Housing and food. You know, all of those hospitals and what they're trying to do and how proper diet has become such an important part of it. It seems to me that this integration of the various disciplines that once used to kind of operate in silos coming together is really important. I think that's great about the Red Cross piece. I wasn't aware of that, but it's kind of what you do. I do agree with you that you are very well known, you and the training center, for just plodding along, getting things done, doing the stuff that has to be done, but at the same time being somewhat disruptive in the good way in how you look at those things, Dave. I think it's been such an asset in London, but for many, it's you kind of do it behind the scenes. You get the job done. You get these people trained. You help to train employers, all of that stuff. It's a real gem in London. I'm glad you're our neighbor. I'm glad you're my friend. But I think that the training center is doing fundamentally really solid work in a consistent way. And I really thank you for that, Dave.